You are 31 years old and you work in crisis communications for a mid-tier law firm in Amsterdam. Your job is to make problems disappear before they become headlines. A pharmaceutical company buries a side effect study, you draft a language that reframes it. A partner gets caught in a conflict of interest, you manage the narrative before the press makes the call. You are good at it. You understand that most disasters are not caused by the disaster itself, but by the response to it, and you have made a career out of understanding that gap before anyone else in the room does. You are not idealistic about what you do. You know the work is sometimes dirty. You tell yourself there's a difference between dirty and criminal, and you believe it, mostly, on most days. The case that changes everything is not dramatic when it starts. It is a referral, passed through 3 layers of professional distance, the way sensitive work always moves in your industry. A man named Demian Voss needs representation on a civil asset forfeiture matter. On paper, he is a logistics consultant based in Rotterdam. The file is clean. The referral comes from a senior partner you trust. You take the meeting. Voss is not what you expect. He is 54, quiet in the way that people who have never needed to prove anything are quiet. He wears a watch that costs more than your annual salary and says nothing about it. He lays out the legal situation in precise, unemotional terms. 14 million euros frozen by Dutch financial authorities. He wants you to manage the public dimension of the case, to ensure that no narrative forms in the press before his legal team can act. You ask the right questions. He answers them cleanly. You take the case. The fee is 4 times your standard rate, and it clears within 24 hours. You spend 3 weeks doing exactly what you were hired to do. You monitor press, you place 2 strategically worded statements in financial trade publications, you advise his legal team on the optics of their court filings. The case goes quiet. The asset freeze is partially lifted. Voss calls you on a Thursday afternoon and thanks you in a tone that suggests he is not a man who thanks people often, and that when he does, it means something. Then, a journalist contacts you. Her name is Sophie Brandt. She works for an investigative unit out of Hamburg, and the email she sends you is 6 paragraphs long and surgical. She has connected Voss to a network of shipping companies operating across 12 countries. She has documentation linking those companies to the movement of fentanyl precursors out of Guangzhou. She has a source inside Dutch customs. She is planning to publish in 11 days, and she is reaching out for comment. You sit with that email for 4 hours before you do anything. You understand in the first 20 minutes what it means, but you spend the remaining time confirming it for yourself with the kind of clarity that only comes from not looking away. You are not a lawyer. You have not broken any laws that you know of, but you have spent 3 weeks cleaning the public image of a man who may be one of the most significant drug traffickers operating in Western Europe. You think about the referral chain. You think about who else knew. You think about the 4 times your standard rate that cleared in 24 hours and what that speed of payment means when you understand it now through a different lens. You do not contact Voss first. That is the decision that shapes everything that follows. Instead, you contact a criminal defense attorney you know from a conference in Brussels, someone outside your firm, someone you trust specifically because you have no financial relationship with them. You give her a hypothetical. She listens carefully and says in plain language that the person in your hypothetical has a narrow window and that how they move in the next 48 hours will determine whether they are a witness or a subject. You hang up and you sit in your office for a long time watching the light change over the canal. You call Voss. You do not tell him about Brandt's email, not in the first call. You ask to meet. He suggests a restaurant. You say somewhere private. He pauses, only for a moment, and then gives you an address. When you arrive, there are 2 men outside who are not waiters, and the interior of the building has been cleared. Voss is at a table with a man he introduces only as Renko, who says nothing during the entire meeting and watches you the way a person watches something that might need to be managed later.
You tell Voss about the journalist. You tell him what she has and what she says she has, which are not necessarily the same thing. And you tell him you need to know the difference between those two things before you can do anything useful. Voss looks at you for a long time without speaking. Then he says, "How did you handle this?" And you say, "I called you." He nods once, slowly, in a way that tells you that was the right answer, and also that there was a wrong answer, and that the wrong answer had consequences you are grateful you did not choose. Over the next 72 hours, you do not sleep more than 4 hours total. You learn through channels that Voss opens for you that Sophie Brandt's source inside Dutch customs is a man named Peter Hook, who has been feeding information to 3 separate investigative journalists over 18 months. You learn that Brandt's documentation is partial. She has the shipping companies. She does not yet have the financial layer that connects them to Voss personally. You communicate this assessment to Voss's legal team and to Voss himself, and you recommend a strategy that is entirely legal, if aggressive, a preemptive disclosure to Dutch financial regulators framed as voluntary cooperation, a press statement that gets ahead of Brandt's narrative by conceding the existence of an investigation while disputing its framing, and a civil lawsuit against the publication for a prior piece that contains a factual error. The lawsuit will not win. It is not meant to win. It is meant to delay and to signal. Brandt publishes 12 days later, not 11, and the piece is significant but not devastating. The voluntary disclosure has shifted the regulatory posture. Voss's legal team is already in dialogue with prosecutors. The narrative that forms in the press is complicated rather than clean, and complicated narratives do not sustain public attention the way clean ones do. You watch the coverage cycle and you know within 72 hours that you have bought time. You do not know for what. Voss calls you 2 weeks after the piece runs. He says, "I want you on staff, not as a consultant." You say you are not sure what that means. He explains it clearly. You would be available to him exclusively. You would manage every situation that requires the skills you have. You would be paid 1.2 million euros annually, transferred quarterly to an account in Luxembourg that his team maintains. You would never be asked to do anything illegal, he says, and you believe him in the specific way that you believe someone when you understand that their definition of illegal and yours have the same technical boundary but exist in entirely different moral landscapes. You take 24 hours, which is 12 more than you need, because you want to be honest with yourself about why you are going to say yes. It is not only the money, though the money is real, and it removes a category of anxiety you have carried since your 20s. It is that you are already in. You crossed a line when you called Voss before you called anyone else. You know it. He knows it. The only question now is what you do with the position you're already standing in. You say yes. The first year is almost manageable. Your job is what it has always been, which is to understand problems faster than the people creating them and to construct responses before the consequences solidify. But the problems are larger now, and they arrive with greater frequency, and they carry weight that is different in kind from anything you have dealt with before. A shipment is intercepted in Antwerp. You spend 40 hours managing the communication between 3 separate legal teams across 2 jurisdictions to ensure that no single attorney has enough information to construct the full picture. A local politician in Marseille, who has accepted money from a company connected to Voss's network, begins to cooperate with French authorities. You do not know what happens to him. You do not ask. He stops cooperating. You understand what this means, and you file it in the part of yourself where you keep the things you cannot afford to look at directly. You develop systems. You learn to compartmentalize not just information, but your own reactions to information, which is a different and more demanding skill. You have 3 phones. You communicate with different layers of the operation through different channels, and you never mix them. You keep a document, encrypted, that functions as your own record of every decision you have made and why. You tell yourself it is for legal protection. You know it is also because you need to be able to read your own reasoning back to yourself and confirm that it still makes sense, that you are still a person with a coherent moral logic and not simply a function. Voss travels frequently, and you travel with him when the situation requires it. You are in Dubai, in Singapore, in Bogota, in Lagos. You watch how he moves through rooms and how people respond to him, and you understand that what you are witnessing is not simply wealth or even power in the conventional sense. It is something older than that, a kind of gravity that other people orient themselves around without choosing to. You study it the way you study everything, analytically, at a distance, because the alternative is to be moved by it, and being moved by it would make you worse at your job. In the second year, a man approaches you at a hotel bar in Vienna. He is American, and he identifies himself as working for a federal agency he names clearly, and you do not doubt. He knows your name, he knows your salary, he knows